used as a contrastive idea and is often translated as but. See, the Lord looked favorably on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering, he did not look favorably. So that will be Ve'el, actually Ve'el Cain, right? Would be the introduction of our but. And introductory use. In this use, the disjunctive vav may begin a new narrative or introduce a new idea or theme within a narrative. So it's kind of like a paragraph mark. That's how it's used. So now the serpent was more crafty than any of the creatures that the Lord God had made. This is an introductory statement or sentence. Usually, we know from the context. After that will be the story of the snake seducing Eve into bringing the whole humankind down. Yeah, those women have in the old days. Nobody's listening to me, so.
I am.
Okay, well, and that's it. So these are different issues. It's more for the reference sources than for anything else, because if you look at your homework, there's only 5 sentences there.
10.
Well, I made you do 5, 1 through 5. 5 sentences, and you will see different issues going in those sentences. They will not be in the midterm, but kind of work through them. One may be actually in the midterm. I haven't decided which one.
1 through 5, you said?
1 through 5, yeah, that's the whole homework besides the vocabulary section. Maps of the Gospel of John. John is probably writing his Gospel from Ephesus. That's where he ended up after destruction of Jerusalem. You know that all the Jews were dispersed throughout Roman Empire. They were kicked out of Jerusalem. Then they were kicked out of many other places. Rome, Corinth, Jerusalem. So John ended up at Ephesus. Whose church was at Ephesus prior to John? Who was pastor of the Ephesian church? Kind of like overseer. Timothy, that's correct. Timothy, the student of Paul, was pastor at Ephesus. We see that he is no longer there when John is there. John is assuming responsibility of the bishop of the Ephesian church. So either Timothy moved on in his ministry, or maybe he is already dead. We don't know. Because persecutions were on their rise at that time. Another map we see here is map of the Isle of Patmos. That's where John ended up being exiled by Roman Empire. In fact, he was at the island of Patmos before he ended up at Ephesus. So he actually died on the continent, not on the island. There are a lot of memorials on this island. In fact, there's a monastery of St. John, exactly where the cave was where he used to live. There's a movie that just came out maybe 2 years ago, Apocalypse of St. John, which shows how they were working on sulfur mines. And Barabbas is another movie. It's a speculation on how Barabbas met John and actually became Christian. Do you know who Barabbas is? The guy who was supposed to be crucified instead of Jesus, and then who was released. So, it's a fiction, of course, but it would be a nice story if it were true. If Luke presents Christ in his humanity as the Son of Man in his Gospel, then John portrays him in his deity as the Son of God. So there's a major contrast. Very often you will see, as part of the evangelistic campaign, people distributing the Gospel of John by itself. Their strategy is to show that Jesus is God. Although in the Western civilization, I think that it would be better to distribute the Gospel of Luke, because we want to know how God is connected to humanity, and Jesus is shown as Son of Man in the Gospel of Luke. But if we'll take both Gospels, Luke and John, it's kind of like a balancing act. Jesus is fully God and fully man. So, and if you take both together, you'll have the historical Jesus and you'll have theological Jesus on one hand and on the other. So nothing is done without a reason in the scriptures, and that's why we have 4 gospel accounts. Each one pursues its own goal. It has its own purpose. If we wouldn't have Luke, we wouldn't have the chronological story of Jesus. If we wouldn't have John, we wouldn't have theological discussion about Jesus. If we wouldn't have Mark, we wouldn't have the action movie about Jesus. And if we wouldn't have Matthew, we wouldn't be able to witness to the Jewish people and to explain to them how Jesus is tied up into a Jewish world and how Jews are to be saved in the new covenant. Well, this is the Jesus the King. He emailed me that picture recently. He's got his new gown. So, just kidding. It's probably more of an Irish Jesus or German Jesus now. John's purpose, and this is not the real purpose of the book, it's kind of like an introductory purpose, is to set forth Christ in his deity in order to spark believing faith in his readers. You have to remember that John is the last remaining live disciple of Jesus before the story will pass on to the church fathers. Polycarp was John's disciple. Irenaeus was Polycarp's disciple. Disciples of the apostles are referred to as church fathers. This is a second generation of Christian leaders that have struggled with a lot of theological issues, with a lot of fights for different faith statements or suggestions. And it's very good to read church fathers because you will see how different doctrines actually were formalized or formed. And they're as inspired as the writings of the disciples because they're basically continuing on the Christian tradition throughout the centuries. So John's gospel is topical, not primarily chronological. That's why you won't see the sequences of events. It's topical. And it revolves around 7 miracles and 7 I am statements of Christ. So only 7 miracles and 7 I am statements. Of course, the statement I am means what? In my Hebrew scholars. Craig.
Self-existent. Or
I am.
The one who is self-existent.
In Hebrew means what? I am.
You guys need to keep it
Yeah.
going.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
I can't say it because it's disrespectful.
Well, Adonai, if you can say Adonai.
But that's not the
Right.
word for I am, though, Alex.
Yeah, that's, or you can say tetragrammaton, which
That's
is a
right.
proper address. I am is actually a statement in Jewish language that does not exist because it is actually the name of God. That's how God revealed himself to Moses. He said, I am who I am. Basically saying, I am eternal being. I was not and I will not be. I am. Throughout past, present, and future. Do you see how significant it is? God wasn't and he will not be. He just is. In the future, past, and present. Which means time doesn't mean anything to him. He sees all times at once. Yeah.
I was just going to say that it's interesting because God says I am, which is not a past tense or a future tense, it's a present tense, which means there is no past or future with God.
Yeah. Like I just said.
Yeah, you should Just trying
Yeah,
out loud, Alex.
I was trying to come back here. I had some of my high school students that I was discipling. We were at Taco Bell and we had our Bibles out. And a woman comes up and says, "That's fascinating. you're reading the Bible. I'm curious about the God of the Bible. Some other gods have proper names. What is the proper name of the God in the Bible? And I say, well, the closest we get in Hebrew is Yahweh, or I am in English. And she said, I am? What's that supposed to mean? And so she stood there and was asking us questions about it for a little bit, and she walked away, just shaking her head, saying, I am. What a funny name for a god. That was the last thing she said and walked off.
What was her taco with?
It was the hot sauce.
But there's
No.
also the name Elohim,
Mhm.
or Adonai is also.
Well, you see, Elohim is not a unique name. It used to be in the Canaanite culture long before Yahweh.
But if she didn't like I am,
Well,
she could go with that.
last summer I was at the youth camp, and there was an assignment to find different names for God or titles for God in the Old and New Testament. How many do you think there are?
100.
Are we counting?
Of course, I won the contest, but it wasn't. It wasn't fair because all of them were kids. You know?
Well, is there
I spent 2 years.
Did you include names of Jesus as well?
Yeah, names of Jesus, titles, quality statements like
Well, there's tons
The
of
door.
Jesus.
Elohim, El Tzidkenu, Adonai Tzidkenu, and so on and so forth. So I found, and I don't think I found everything, I kind of browsed through the Bible, I found about 237 or 38. I think they crossed out 2 because they were kind of repetitious. But the year before that, when they were doing it, I think the maximum they were able to find was 74.
Ooh,
So,
that's bad.
yeah. Well, once they knew that there's more than 74, they were quite surprised because, it's an enormous number. And they asked me, how did I find out? And I said, well, see, it helps when you study Hebrew and Greek. Of course, they said, no, we don't want to do that. But Hebrew is a very picturesque language, and since they couldn't draw pictures of God, they could make verbal portraits of him for any and every particular situation when he revealed himself in certain historical episodes. Like, God is my banner in the battlefield, or God is my rock, God is my salvation, or God is my help, or my fortress, yeah, or God is my foundation. See, all of these are verbal pictures of God, and in your mind you can actually imagine how God is your fortress. I mean, you can't get through that fortress, because if God protects you, nobody else can get you. So, they were quite taken by that. I think it prompted them to look closer to the biblical text, looking for that, because they were only looking for Jesus, Emmanuel, and all those obvious answers.
Did you write them all down?
Yeah, I had to write them all down, and references too.
Who did the other
I
write
speed
them?
read it. You know what? I might request it. They kept the original. They kept the original because there was a money prize for it.
Oh,
You steal
Yeah.
from a little kid.
And what was that?
Teaching capitalism, bro.
Did you translate them out?
Either that
They were
or
all in
both.
English.
Or did you translate in Hebrew?
No, I didn't use Hebrew titles. I just used English translation of
No, I'm
Hebrew.
saying like, if you said, "He's my rock," did you translate it?
Oh no, I just put the original Hebrew, El, whatever. There are many more than rock. Rockers like that. He's my rock. I saw on the jacket of one of the bikers, Jesus is my rock. Rocker jacket. This is the map of Ephesus.